In 2018, Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje had a Fight of the Year candidate where after a lot of violence, Justin got the TKO win early in the fourth round. After this, Justin changed up his game, becoming a lot less chaotic and a lot more accurate, while Dustin avenged his no contest to Eddie Alvarez on his way to the title. In spite of this, these two fighters actually share a lot in common with their career trajectories. Both fighters became interim champions, and both fighters came up short in their four shared title fights against the same champions. Dustin defeated then featherweight champion Max Holloway in, at the time, what was considered quite a big upset as we were in the blessed era, but then was choked out by Khabib Nurmagomedov. A year later, Dustin broke the 12-fight win streak of Tony Ferguson in a beatdown, but was then choked unconscious by Khabib in his retirement fight. Both fighters then lost their next title fights by rear naked choke to Charles Oliveira. After their bizarre career symmetry, Dustin and Justin were now set for a rematch on July 29th. While both fighters are at different points in their career, the rematch is representative of that. Both fighters are entering the tail end of their career, with any title opportunity they get likely being their last. Luckily for us, neither Dustin nor Justin are ever involved in boring fights, and there's a lot to get excited about. In this video, I'm going to go over their first fight as well as their more recent fights to see what's changed and what hasn't. I'm also going to talk about some of the X factors and talk a little about what I think is going to happen in their rematch. I hope you enjoy. Just as a disclaimer, sometimes I accidentally say Dustin instead of Justin and Justin instead of Dustin. I hope you can kind of figure out when I accidentally do that, and I also put like a subtitle in. Apologies in advance. On April 14th, 2018, these two fighters met for the first time in what became a Fight of the Night scrap. While I understand that 5 years is a long time for a fighter to change and develop, it's still valuable analysing their first fight. It's also a great fight and worth watching for that reason too. I'm also going to go over a couple of key sequences in the fight and talk about why I think they're important, and also might even play a factor in their rematch. To start round 1, Justin pushes Dustin back straight away, and he does this at the start of every round for the entire fight. Justin's leg kicks aren't as natural and effective due to the open stance. This is a key factor of the fight, and also happens to be the reason of the stoppage early in round 4. Because Dustin is a southpaw, Justin is left with two options. He can either kick to the inside of Dustin's lead leg, or he can throw switch kicks. He tried a mixture of these choices with varying success. It looked to me like throwing switch kicks was a little unnatural for Justin, and they didn't land with as much of a thud as usual. To throw inside leg kicks on the southpaw Dustin, Justin needed to swing his leg a lot further than usual to make a connection. This isn't ideal at the best of times, as it leaves you pretty open to your opponent stepping through and punching you in the face. Knockouts because of that are fairly common, and Poirier gave Justin hell for it. Even if the kick landed, Dustin would still land a nasty straight, which happened numerous times, and is also what started the finish itself. Looking at the fight in more detail, I also noticed how efficient Dustin's boxing is. He's one of the only fighters in the UFC to use genuine boxing defense, as opposed to just slipping punches and moving back. It can be troublesome at times in particular matchups, as when in the middle of shoulder rolling and defending punches, he is vulnerable to other attacks. Charles landed nasty body kicks as an example, but in this fight, his boxing defense was displayed multiple times, and it's amazing to watch when you really break it down. When Dustin throws big loopy right hands, Dustin defends them pretty easily, but the few times Justin throws his punch straight, it was much more effective in getting through to Poirier's head. This is how he ends up hurting him in the third round. The last thing I'll talk about their first fight is Dustin landing combinations when Justin is hunched over. Justin has a bit of a bad habit, particularly when exchanging blows, where he'll hunch over with a high guard. This is bad for a few reasons. When he had his second title fight, Charles was punching Gaethje's head down into knees, headlocks, and in general just taking advantage of it. Dustin also punished him for it, landing to the body and throwing hooks around the guard of Justin Gaethje. His hunching over was the reason he took a lot more damage than he needed to in their first fight, and with Dustin, the damage really adds up over the rounds. When I spoke about the Usman-Edwards trilogy, I mentioned how in the years between Fight 1 and 2, Leon added various new skills to his game, almost looking like a completely different fighter in fights 2 and 3, while Usman strengthened what he was good at instead of adding many more skills to his arsenal. I see a similar thing with Dustin versus Justin, but not to the extent of Edwards and Usman. Since they fought, Dustin more or less just got better at what he already did, while Justin had a bit of a style change. He didn't blindly walk forward as much and became more calculated in his attacks, and in general just became a more effective fighter. In his most recent fight against Rafael Fiziev, we saw Justin's first takedown in the UFC, and we also saw that he had taken the time to fight specifically for Fiziev. When he slid out of the way with Fiziev's infamous switch kick, that's when we knew Justin had game planned. Justin Gaethje we see today is a fighter who keeps things pretty basic: jab, cross, hook, uppercut, leg kick, and now a double leg takedown are the only things he uses. He's not much of a combination hitter, rather opting for damaging shots to land one at a time. He's one of those guys that always seems to create a thud when he hits you, especially with his right hand and leg kick. Overall, Justin uses basic techniques at very high effectiveness to beat up some of the best fighters in the world. After TKOing Gaethje in round 4, Dustin Poirier corrected his no contest fight with Eddie Alvarez by finishing him in round 2. Following this, he won the interim title by defeating then featherweight champion Max Holloway. To this day, it's probably still my favourite fight ever, since I remember pretty vividly how all the interviews and videos were released were about Max becoming double champ. Dustin was being overlooked, yet I had full confidence. Sure enough, he won and snapped Holloway's 12-fight win streak, a special day for Poirier fans like me, and no, I don't want to talk about the fight that happened after. In recent years, Dustin hasn't been as active as he used to. I think because he's getting older and has a lot of other stuff going on in his life. In spite of the recent inactivity, Dustin still looks sharp on the feet, making his most recent opponent Michael Chandler miss a whole bunch of times. As I referenced earlier, Dustin uses a lot more traditional boxing defense than a lot of other UFC fighters, which comes with its own pros and cons. He's one of the hardest fighters today to hit clean. It took one of the great sharpshooters of MMA, McGregor, to be able to catch him, and even in their recent fights, McGregor has had mixed results. In his most recent fight, Dustin made Chandler miss comically numerous times. Dustin's boxing defense is great in a division with not too many big kickers, but it does leave him open to other types of attacks. Charles Oliveira would hit Dustin with knees down the middle, at one point causing visible damage on Dustin. At some points it can also leave his hips open to fighters shooting for takedowns. Like any fighter, these two have pros and cons to their skill sets, but luckily for us, neither guy ever gets involved in boring fights, and they match up with each other in a fantastic way. Upon taking a deeper dive into either fighter, I've noticed a couple of things. I think before, I may have overestimated Justin Gaethje's style change. He definitely doesn't throw himself into the fire as much, but a lot of what he does hasn't changed, that being throwing single shots with some super powerful leg kicks to go along with it. Dustin's style hasn't changed much either, but I think his grappling has had little additions over time. It's easy to write off his grappling, judging from his 2 title fights, but I don't think that tells the whole story. Dustin momentarily used the Dagestani handcuff in his fight with Dan Hooker and had a great grappling sequence against Chandler, where he prevents Chandler's back take, and a minute later becomes the first person to ever submit Michael Chandler. I'm going to talk about a couple of things I think either guy could do to have a more successful fight, and then finally give a prediction of the fight as a whole. With Justin Gaethje, first thing is switch kicks. I say switch instead of going to the inside with his right kick, because it's going to be easier for him to reach the calf, his preferred target, and also if they're done well, Dustin isn't going to be able to hit him with the left as Justin kicks, which he did many times in their first fight. Opting for switch kicks will naturally put Justin on Dustin's right side, away from the left hand. The right hook and jab is still there, but with the switch kick, Dustin can tuck his chin behind his shoulder to keep it relatively protective. Volkanovski is a great example of this. The other thing that would really benefit Justin in the stand-up is punching straight. I noticed in their first fight that the striking accuracy for Justin's straight punches was so much higher than when he was throwing looping overhands. This is also partially due to Justin's shoulder rolling. If the right hand is being thrown loopy, Dustin's going to be able to see it coming, and it naturally will just reflect off his shoulder easier. For Dustin Poirier, it's kind of things he did in his first fight, but not enough, and it kind of stems from this hunching over that Justin does. In the first fight, Dustin went to the body a couple of times and landed pretty well, but didn't really go to it again later on in the fight. In the rematch, I think having a bit more of a targeted game plan to attack the body would work well over 5 rounds. If Justin is hunched over, uppercuts to the gut and solar plexus are going to hurt a lot more, and it can even set up uppercuts to the chin later on in the fight. A lot of the things Dustin was doing in the first fight will work in the second fight, but since Justin won't march forward as much, Dustin's successes probably won't happen as often. The last thing I'm going to talk about is something both guys would benefit from, but for different reasons. That being takedowns. In the first fight, Dustin only shot a few times, but Justin went to great lengths to defend them, and as a result it gassed him out. A mix-up of body shots in combos and takedown attempts to draw big reactions. Dustin can tire out Justin, which allows him to hurt him. Remember, this fight is taking place at elevation too, and Dustin is not someone to let you off the hook if he hurts you. For Justin, takedowns would serve a more traditional use, control time, winning rounds, ground and pound. Dustin Poirier's takedown defense has mixed results. He seems to have trouble more often with strong explosive wrestlers like Khabib and Chandler than tricky guys who use trips and stuff like that. If timed well, Justin could absolutely get Dustin down, and after his last fight with Fiziev, I have a feeling he might in this fight. We can safely assume this won't be a replay of the first fight, so what can we expect? At the very least, we know Justin isn't just going to walk forward and eat punches. Because of this, Dustin may fight more offensively, which is where Justin can time leg kicks as Dustin leans forward to punch, or even takedowns. Alternatively, Dustin pushing the pace, hitting to the body and drawing big reactions with takedown attempts will eventually pay off later in the fight. For some silly reason, the UFC have put one of the best cards of the year in Utah at higher elevation, where everyone's going to get tired way easier and the fights will be more sluggish as a result. Great job, UFC. If I had to guess, I'd say the altitude will affect Justin more, although both fighters do have pretty good endurance. This may be my bias shining through, but I am going to go with Dustin in the rematch. On the ground, I have a feeling that Dustin's BJJ will keep Justin at bay, and on the feet it's definitely going to be back and forth, but I see Dustin getting the better of it. We've seen in the past a slightly limited jiu-jitsu of Justin, and while jumping guillotines is every Poirier fan's worst nightmare, I think Dustin throwing up numerous submissions will keep Justin at bay, a little like the Dan Hooker fight. Dustin is also one of the few fighters that did end up exploiting Justin's hunching over, and it's likely Dustin will do it again. So my final prediction, I am going to go with Dustin again, but regardless, it should be a great fight and I hope you enjoy it. If you want to tell me your predictions or if you have something to say about the video, be sure to leave a comment, and as usual, thank you for watching.